Well, good morning, everybody, all the attendees, our panelists for the webinar today, Shelf Space Intellectual Property webinar with the CMA. My name is Marty McIntyre, Member Services with the Category Management Association. If you ever have any questions at all involving the CMA or anything really, I love to answer questions. I'll get you, if I can't answer it, I'll get you to the right person that can. Today, you're going to be learning about making shelf space through more productive through automated localized planograms. I apologize. And got some great people you're going to be hearing from. All of you probably know these guys. John Williams, Director of Category Management with Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Greg Wilson, Field Strategies with Relics. Teresa Rutledge, Business Development with Relics. And so we're going to be having the next 45 minutes or so with them. They'll give you information, and of course you can ask questions at the end. I want to remind everybody about the Category Management Shopper Insight Conference. I know this is a last-ditch effort, but if you still want to go, you can. It's May 7th through the 9th at the Gaylord Opryland in Nashville, Tennessee. You're going to be able to meet people like John Williams, or Greg Wilson, or Teresa Rutledge, or people from Dr. Pepper and Relics there. That's just one of the things that we offer there. So we hope that you come. You can still join if you want. Great networking effort, and lots of information that is given out to everyone. I need to take care of a tiny bit of business real quick before we get started. If you're looking at your screens, the Category Management Association, the CMA, has an antitrust compliance policy. Take a quick look at that as we move through this morning. And again, we appreciate everybody joining us, and of course our panelists for presenting today. I am going to send this presentation and let them talk about what they're up to and themselves. I'm going to start it off with Teresa Rutledge. Teresa, good morning to you, and I'm passing the baton your way.
Thank you. Good morning. And Marty, can you see my screen? Did we do that?
You are good. You're good to go.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We're excited to be able to talk through the work that Relics and Dr. Pepper have been doing. Today we're going to specifically talk about that partnership and how we've been working to improve the process and productivity of creating planograms. The project we're going to be focusing on specifically was working with cold vaults, which required a really unique approach to the flow and the placement strategy. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but first I'm going to turn it over to John to give a little bit of background on Dr. Pepper.
Good morning, everybody. This is John Williams. I'm Director of Category Management. I'm here in our Plano office in Dallas, in our headquarters, and I am over our space and assortment team nationally. And so just a little bit about Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. You know, we have over 50 brands. I think a lot of people don't realize how many brands we actually have. We're established as our own company in 2018 when we spun off from Cadbury Schweppes, as somebody you may remember, who was based in England. 6.4 billion in sales, Fortune 500, and we've got a lot of the #1 and #2 leading brands across the country. So go ahead and go to the next slide. And this gives you a view of the great brands that we have. You know, we play in a lot of different beverage categories, from juices to waters to carbonated soft drinks, teas, and even the mixer business. I think a lot of people don't realize we have a lot of the mixers and Mr. and Mrs. Teas and Margaritaville. And then, you know, you look at some of our brands like Canada Dry Ginger Ale that's been showing growth over the past 11 years and growing double digits already this year. So ginger ale is really a strong area right now. So, but that's a little bit about us, and we'll go ahead and get started and talk about some really the exciting things that we've done around convenience store automation.
Thank you, John. So like John said, we're going to start with a little bit of background on how we got into this project. And one thing that I'm sure as anybody working in retail knows is managing a category requires many, many steps with a lot of moving pieces. You've got to be analyzing performance, you're anticipating market trends, forecasting, predicting demand, And this requires a lot of work to gather the data that's needed, to crunch the numbers, and then to be able to take action on the insights obtained. And so retailers are struggling to be able to accomplish all of this, and they have limited resources. They're being pulled in multiple directions. If anybody's had a similar experience to me, many times retailers are putting out fires just from a week-to-week basis, so they're having to focus on the here and now, instead of being able to work on the really meaningful activities to help grow their categories. And so because of that, retailers really rely on their vendor partners to help them and to provide insights on the market. And so this is where a lot of vendors like Dr. Pepper can really differentiate themselves to become an invaluable partner to their retailers. And so we'll be talking about this more throughout the presentation, but this is what Dr. Pepper wanted to achieve, to be able to become an even better partner and work in collaboration with their retailers. And so with that, there's of all of those steps that are involved in that process, we really pulled out 4 key areas where their vendors are able to specifically add some measurable value and take some of the more tedious activities off of the retailer. So the first 2 of creating and optimizing the planograms is a process that can take a long time. It can be many months in order to get this right, especially when you're starting to get down to the localized store-specific plans. And so again, when vendors can step in and can help with this, or even just take it off a retailer's plate, it allows that category team to spend more time doing those value-add activities. But then, of course, the best laid plans, if you aren't able to implement those, you're not going to be able to see the actual output. And I think, one of the biggest struggles in the industry is execution. And if you're not able to execute them, that can lead again to a pretty big miss in hitting goals. And then the last one on here is just having the insights and analytics. Once you've been able to actually create these plans to implement them, you'll need to be able to evaluate the program for successes and opportunities to continue growing in the future. And so all of these areas are where vendors can help make a really big impact to a retailer's success. And this is exactly what Dr. Pepper was looking to provide for their retailers. And so I'm going to turn it over to John here again to talk a little bit more about their journey in this project.
Yeah, thanks. So at Dr. Pepper Snapple, over the years within the space area, we focused really on 3 main things: our process, our methodology, and the technology to drive that. So we've developed a 7-step proprietary process that we've used for over the past 10 years. And, we've won awards in the industry over the years, for that and what we've done. Our methodology that we specifically focus on is days of supply. So, getting down to that item by item level optimization to make sure we have the right space on the shelf so we don't go out of stock. And then the technology. So over the years, technology has gotten better. We've stepped into automation over the years. And one thing we haven't been able to do is really master automation for the convenience cold vault. So if you think about the convenience retailers out there, they usually have between 5 to sometimes 12 doors of non-alcoholic beverages. And so it doesn't sound very complex, but when you look at all the different categories and the number of shelves and the way those items are merchandised, it's been really hard to automate that process so that you can actually put the right items on certain shelves and still make sure you're grouping categories and subcategories together. So that's been a challenge. So we actually did a proof of concept with Relax in Q4 on this concept. And we gave them the toughest challenge. We gave them the toughest rule set in the industry, gave them data to tackle this opportunity. And what came out was a really successful proof of concept proving that, yeah, we can automate the space. And really, we've gotten up to probably about an 85 to 90% rate of, getting to exactly where we want to be. I know we're never going to get to 100% because we're always going to need that art that the technology is not going to be able to do. So over the years, I've seen in the industry, I've seen others do some automation around the convenience store, and they're not getting close. They're still leaving a lot of time to do validations, and sometimes months of validation even after you've done the automation. So we wanted to get closer to that. We can't spend a lot of time doing manual planograms and doing a lot of manual work after we've done the automation. So that's where we are today. It's positioned us to go after captainships out in the industry as a focus for our business today. The convenience channel is very profitable for us. So that is number one objective going into this year and 2019. It's going to set us up for success. And then you can see the benefits. The benefits of this automation. One of the biggest benefits is going to be being able to make changes quickly. If the retailer changes their strategy, as we're going down the path or in the middle of the process, we can quickly change the rule sets within the automation and run all the stores again. So if you think about how we've done in the past, where you're doing manual planograms and something may change in the middle of the process, which does happen, you have to start again, redo those planograms manually. So that's a big advantage of the automation. Plus, we're able to reduce retailers' timeline. So if a retailer traditionally sets their cold vaults in March or April, we're able to move that up by possibly a month, where they can get out quicker than their competition with new innovation and optimized sets. So they can move that up to a January or February time frame. So another big advantage. And then also, it's going to increase sales, increase profit, reducing out of stocks. And, that's obviously a huge benefit when we combine our days of supply methodology with the automation. So reducing those out of stocks. And then, for us, it's helping us do more with our existing resources. So with limited resources, how can we continue to go after captaincy ships? It's the automation. That's how we're going to be able to do it. In the environment today, we don't have the ability to add people on the team or increase our head count. The automation can take care of that.
Thank you, John. And one of the things that John did mention here is the ability to make changes quickly without having to start from scratch, and how you can edit the rule sets to make those changes and have them be done much quicker. And Greg's going to go into how this actually works, and we'll be able to talk to that a little bit.
Thanks, Teresa. So yeah, the process starts with three main components that go into building the foundation of the whole process. It starts with having a representative planogram that is a reference for the best practice, or what we'd like our stores to look like. And some of the philosophies that are built into that approach, we carry over to a template of what we call a merchandising strategy. And in this strategy, we're blocking out sections of areas that are going to be filled with product based on those attributes of the product that caused us to place them where they are. Things like brands, flavors, sizes, and the relationships of those within the set that we're putting together. And then for each one of those blocks of product, we're putting together adjacencies, which says within that type of product, which product do I want placed first, and then what product do I want placed next to that, and so on and so forth. So these three things come together as the building blocks to generate automated planograms for as many locations as you need to, potentially hundreds or even thousands of locations. So once these things are in place, what we do is we assign the planograms to different stores, the templates, and the combination of what that master plan is, plus the assortment that's involved in this particular group of merchandise, together with the strategy template and the adjacencies, those are all brought together in addition with performance data for each individual store. Now that performance data can vary depending on what we're trying to achieve. We can take a simple approach, just looking at historical sales performance and averages, or in more sophisticated implementations for some of our more integrated customers, we can actually drive this process from our forecasting engine, so we're having a forward-driven planogram rather than just looking at past performance. So these things come together, and the system takes them and generates individual planograms for each location. And it's expanding and contracting facings based on the performance data that comes together while maintaining consistency by using the merchandising templates and the adjacency templates. The result of that is the individual store planograms are generated, and the system also scores them. So we can go through and review those that didn't reach a high enough score threshold and make minor modifications that are necessary to get those that didn't meet all the thresholds in line, and thus ending up with a unique planogram for each individual store location. So as we started to do this with Dr. Pepper, they gave us the initial planogram that represented many of the merchandising principles. Now, this is often just a single planogram, frequently of the largest floor set. Sometimes there'll be one or two variations of this. From this, we can derive a lot of the strategies that go into those templates that I mentioned before. So we can look at this and understand the relationships of products, the sequence of products relative to each other, and general philosophy of what's trying to be conveyed in the overall planogram. Now, these translate into the merchandise strategy that I mentioned before. We call this a blocking template. And this is made up of putting products in different groupings within the planogram. So you'll see at a high level here, we've got juices together with waters and coffees and energy drinks and carbonated soft drinks in different sections. And within each of those, we have subgroupings. For example, here in water, we've got value versus premium, enhanced and sparkling. When we look at carbonated soft drinks, we're breaking these out by sizes and package. So we've got 1 liters in one section, whereas we've got cans in another and bottles in yet another. So this is kind of driving this strategy that allows the system to adhere to consistency, so all of these planograms it's generating look and feel the same across a company's organization, but they're expanding and contracting appropriately to the individual location's performance metrics. So these adjacencies, these are then tied together with adjacencies of the products within. And here we can set whether we want products to go right to left or go back and forth as they're being placed within any of these blocks. And it determines how the products are laid out within each of these strategic blocks. And then finally, these all come together with the adjacencies and the blocks, and we'll create these templates for different size locations. So sometimes we'll have a slightly different strategy, for example, in smaller locations where we may have some vertical striping of products just because of the size constraints, whereas in larger format stores, we may have horizontal striping of products within certain ranges of space. And these different philosophies are captured in the templates. So we have a small set of the templates with 1 or 2 representative planograms, a single sequence template, and that's everything that's necessary to generate each of the individual store plans. We can also instruct the system to expand and contract the assortment which is something that we haven't done in the recent iterations with Dr. Pepper, but is something that we provide as a solution as well. And what this allows us to do is define a certain segment of product as our core product representation, and then another segment of products as tertiary, and they will expand and contract the assortment to fill space based on whether or not they actually perform, which allows us to get to a truly localized assortment and presentation of that assortment, which is something that I think is quite unique for us. So Teresa, I think we were going to talk about what we ended up with.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So now that everybody's had a chance to kind of see how that process works, we'll talk through the results that came from working with Dr. Pepper in the convenience channel, going through the process that Greg just talked through, and working with the retail team as well as the Dr. Pepper team in collaboration on this project. And so what we saw by doing the automation and the optimization of these plans at a store-specific label level, we were able to increase the sales and margin. We reduced the out-of-stocks and the backroom inventory, and this was all completed in a much shorter time frame. So, John spoke to these things earlier as well, but a lot of times that category review process was taking anywhere from 6 to 8 months, and we were able to reduce this down to closer to 2 to 3 months. And so again, it just makes it a lot quicker in the go-to-market strategy, which can make a very large impact. And then, of course, not surprisingly, when the retailers are seeing a benefit, so did Dr. Pepper. And so they saw an improvement in their assortment offering, their margin, and their unit turns. And one of the things we want to talk to a little bit more is the importance of turns. And so, John, I'm going to let you talk on that a little bit more.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and as you optimize the days of supply, you can get these assortment increases. There's a lot of space out there when you start looking at it on an item-by-item basis. So it allows the retailer to bring in, more assortment and more innovation items that sometimes they think, we don't have room for these. But if we look at a different method, instead of, sometimes you may look at a space to sales method and think, we really don't have enough space. But when you look at it a little more in detail using days of supply, you realize that there is space out there to be had. And then as you optimize your days of supply and reduce those days of supply on the shelf, the inverse relationship is you increase your turns. So increasing turns is a really interesting concept because it lets us start thinking about space, not just as, space on a shelf, but it's a really financial positive impact to the business. So if you think about a concept which came out several years ago called the Rule of 32, and what that basically says is if you can get your turns on an item-by-item basis above 32 turns a year, that's about the point you start generating more cash flow for the business before you have to pay back an invoice. So it's a concept that one of the largest retailers in the country came up with several years ago, and they started realizing that they can use these high-turning categories to generate cash flow, and a buyer for a certain category could generate cash for the company, and they may not have to go to the bank to borrow money. They could use the cash flow that's generated from this turns Rule of 32 concept. And so there are some major retailers on their scorecard, they have turns, because that's a very important concept to really make sure you take a look at. Okay.
Thank you, John.
And if we're at the end, I've got one more thing I want to say, that it's actually an email I just got this morning. This is going to sound a little bit like a setup, but Relax doesn't even know about this yet. But at 9:25 this morning, we just got an email from a retailer from our NAE who has just appointed us category captain in the convenience channel for 2019 based on this proof of concept that we did in Q4, based on the first test that we did earlier this year for a retailer on some of their stores in Florida. So that's brand new news. And Relax, you guys haven't even heard that yet. So it's already working for 2019 and what we're going towards. So just got that in this morning, 9:25 Central Time. So great news on our end. We're going after them.
Awesome. I like the surprising development of where you're headed with that.
just got that in, so I figured I'd announce it right here.
Perfect. Well, that does bring us close to the end of what we had planned to present today. What we will just go over for anybody who isn't familiar with Relax and who we are. We're a global retail software organization, and we're really focused on providing the industry with a unified solution that goes from supply chain to space planning to workforce management, and being able to tie all of these areas together to work in collaboration and to build efficiency. We've been in the retail planning industry for over 20 years now, creating innovative solutions that can be used by our customers worldwide. And one of the things about our customer base is that they're all referenceable, which really goes to show our dedication to partnering with our clients. And if anybody wants to learn more about who Relax is and Dr. Pepper, feel free to get in touch with John or me at the emails here. You can also meet us next week if you're going to be at CMA, then we'll be there. We're at booth 37, so feel free to stop by and say hi.
And we do have time for questions. Teresa, John, Greg, thank you so much. Okay to ask some questions, team?
Yep, shoot.
Okay.
Yes.
One of them that has come in, and yes, and one answer immediately is yes, people will be able to get the presentation. That was the first one. What is the approximate time and dollar investment for a project of this scope? Do retailers typically share the expense? Good question.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll take some of that. So the way our model has worked is that we cover that cost. So, the cost of working with Relax, we have covered that cost. It's not a tremendous cost. The cost obviously depends on the size of the retailer and the number of stores. And, we are seeing a return on investment, so we know the cost that we put into this is going to return us 2, 3, 4 times the investment because of just the profitability within this channel. And as we optimize and get in more assortment for our business, that's definitely going to pay off for us. Plus, being category captains or strategic advisors for retailers does have, a little more value over and beyond that. Getting in more innovation, getting in the right items for the sets, not just focusing on our business, but focusing on the entire category and what's right for the category to grow the retailer's business. And so, if you guys want to comment further on that question.
Sure, I'll just add to that for retailers looking for assistance in these types of things beyond the beverage arena, we do offer the solution as software, and we will implement that with you and train you on how to use the automation features. They are typically quite a bit simpler than some of the other solutions out there that attempt to do this. They're much more business oriented. You don't have to become a coder or anything like that to be able to accommodate the level of automation that we've talked about here.
Okay, do have another question. Does Relax replace JDA Plano generator, or does it work with Plano generator?
I think the answer to that is probably a resounding yes, because we do both. So we can consume planograms that are generated in other formats, or we can replace those formats. I think as far as planogram generator itself, we typically consider us as a replacement, but it depends on the relationship. So for example, in the case of what we've talked about here, Dr. Pepper has generated those planograms and we can export them into JDA format so they can be consumed by people that are using that format.
Okay, I've got more questions coming in. Let me see, hang on. Oh, we've got a few questions coming in. Let me catch up with them, I'm sorry. My goodness, you guys. Well, real quick, how much time does the process take to set up? And do you run it once, or how is that working for you? How does that work?
Well, there are usually a couple of layers of iteration. So the initial setup is the one that takes the most time, and that is getting those templates in place that I described earlier. And a lot of those can be generated from the reference best practice planogram. Once that's in place, we'll run the process and determine how well the system has met the objectives in its output. Usually the first round of that with a new implementation or a new category of product takes a little bit of review and some refining of some of the goals and strategies, and we'll do one or two iterations until we get to the point that John described where we're doing the vast majority of those through automation and just making minor adjustments. So the first time through for a new category of business, it may take a couple of weeks to get things all ironed out. Subsequent iterations and adds and removes of small quantities of products can be done with a single run and a quick review.
Another question, of the test that was implemented, what was the market share performance for the retailer?
Yeah, so the test we implemented has just gone into effect. So it is actually was reset just a couple of weeks ago. So we don't have the numbers on that yet.
Okay.
So it's just very recent that we've gone into that test that's actually in effect down in Florida right now. So we're very early because we did the proof of concept, then we went and we had a retailer who's very interested, and they were right in the middle of their process. So they said, hey, take our Florida stores and let's see how that does. So we're really right at the beginning here.
Love it. Can brands flow from one block to another in an automated fashion given space is available?
Yeah, that's completely configurable. So we can control how much the different blocks and spaces are able to merge and overlap.
Another question, and maybe this has already been answered in roundabout ways. How does this work in conjunction with JDA space planning?
I think I may have addressed that with the earlier response.
Right.
We can consume and output in JDA format. So, for example, if someone's working with John and Dr. Pepper, we can utilize their existing things without requiring them to make changes.
Another question, guys. How do you incorporate incrementation and cannibalization scores for each SKU to ensure the set includes unique items that may not be generating highest turn, but provides better incrementality to the category, instead of keeping in other SKUs that you probably understand that the SKUs that is too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that comes in our assortment phase. So we do use another assortment tool that does look at the actual incrementality of each item, so that we don't delete, smaller items that are incremental to the set. And if somebody if you want to email me on what tool we use, I can let you know that. I don't know if I want to really put that out there right now, but
and again, you're saying Yeah, your information is up there so people can talk to you. Or again, if you can't find these guys, let myself or the CMA know, and we'll hook you up with them. Is the segment space allocation determined before, during, or after assortment is populated in each store-specific planogram?
Let me make sure I understand. Could you read that one more time? I want to make sure I'm interpreting that correctly.
I will, and let me get back to it. Let's see. I'm sorry, these things are so squished in this. The questions are so squished into this thing, it's hard to get to them. Hang on. Is the segment space allocation determined before, during, or after assortment is populated in each store-specific planogram? Does that help any?
I think so. If I'm understanding the question correctly, we're putting together blocks of space for different types of product, and that's defined before the process generates the individual store planograms. However, as I mentioned earlier, we can define the amount of flex space for each one of those areas, so that enables the system to expand and contract those different areas based on performance to whatever extent we're comfortable with as we configure it.
One more question. Does RELEX provide space to sales analysis and provide what if a scenario of potential sales lift differences between assortment version 1 versus version 2?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, some of that can be done interactively in the process of generating the reference planograms. So we'll utilize that data to help define whether or not adding facings or removing facings from the reference planogram is advisable. And then it's considering those things as it runs the automation as well.
One more question. Cost, and you may have gone over this, but I'm going to read their question anyway. Cost-wise, do you work on a project basis, or is there a contract covering a base period?
I'm going to assume that's a question posed to John.
Yeah, I can answer that. So I think they have a couple of different models. They have, purchasing the software model, and then they have a project model. So what we've been doing at Dr. Pepper is we've been doing project-based models. So that's been the most efficient for us at this point to really narrow down on who we are going after captainships for, and then budget based on that individual project, so that we know, okay, for this year we can go after 3 captaincy ships. For 2019 we're going to target 5 or 6, and that's literally what we're doing today, is targeting how many we want to go after each year and putting the budget dollars behind each one of those projects.
And as far as our model, as John mentioned, typically when we're working with a retailer who's looking to expand their automation capabilities, we would be deploying the software and training them to apply it to their entire organization. And that's our typical model with a retailer.
Okay, and if you're willing, there's more questions. What equipment types can the automation work across? I guess, let's see, that may be part, this may be part, no, that's part of the same question.
Okay, I'm going to guess that that's talking about different types of fixtures and things like that. There are very few limitations. I would say we're very good with any packaged and shelves goods. We can work, obviously, with the cold vaults, as you've seen here, a variety of other things, frozen and all of that. We're not terribly well-versed in apparel, I think would be the one constraint that I would say is one of the areas that would be more of a challenge.
Okay.
What about pegboards? I know pegboards is usually a question.
Yes, yes.
Another question. What is 32 in the turns? Rule of 32? That makes sense. You talked about turns earlier.
Yeah, the 32 is really based on the payment terms that you have with the retailer. So as you pay that invoice, it may be terms, a 30-day, a 10.net 2% term. And so over a year's time, you return that 32 times, and then when you get above 32, that's when you start generating cash flow. But it's a general number. It really depends on the payment terms that you have what the retailer has with their vendors. But in general, 32 is the number that once you hit that, over 32, you start generating cash flow. So I know I heard a story about Dell when they sell individual parts, their turns can be up in the hundreds, and they generate a ton of cash flow. So it's just one side story that I've heard where they can really generate a lot of turns and what they produce, or probably in the past what they could produce.
Okay, thank you. We all know that shelf and space is so labor and data intensive, and of course, Dr. Pepper Schnapple, of all people, can speak to that. How many best practice planograms and strategy templates are needed for a typical retailer?
Well, typical varies quite a bit. It's not unusual to be able to work with a single best practice planogram and 2 or 3 templates that represent major size ranges. But it really varies quite significantly from retailer to retailer. Sometimes there are pretty significant changes in merchandising strategy because of vastly varied formats and things like that that might require more templates. So it's a hard question to answer from a generic perspective.
Yeah, in my experience, I've seen just very few templates. You want to keep your templates down to a minimum, 1, 2, maybe 3, if you've got some complex scenarios. But the key is keeping those templates down to a minimum. 1, if you can keep it to 1, that's going to be the optimum way to do it.
Again, the labor and the data is so intensive. So one more question, I think, and it's back to the convenience. What made the convenience segment more challenging than the other retail segments?
Yeah, so the convenience channel, you would look at it and think it was fairly simple, but when you look at all the cold doors in a convenience store, there are so many different categories and so many different packages and pack sizes, and certain brands and manufacturers are always set together. It gets really complex when you try to optimize the categories and segments, and then as you need more space, making sure the items flow to the right shelf, which sometimes may be the shelf below, not the shelf to the right or left in another door. So I've seen some automation tools where they want to try to set it from right to left or left to right, and then it may flow over into another door where you don't really want it to go into another door because your next door is usually another category. So that's where it's just really been complex, and it's taken a while to get to a point where we can master this area.
And speak to it. And again, congratulations on your latest acquire. I love it. John, Greg, Teresa, thank you so much from Relax for presenting today. So many nuggets. Again, you have ways to get in contact with these guys, or if you'll come through CMA, we'll help you out as well. Truly appreciate we've got one more. Let's see, would you mind taking one more question?
Sure.
Let's see. Let's see, does this tool also clean up the retailer files? They are typically a mess. Or do you build from scratch? There's experience talking right there.
Greg,
Well,
you want to answer that?
Sure.
One?
It depends on what files you're talking about there. What we will do is we'll take an existing planogram and assortment and use that as the minimum foundation. So any noise that might be existing outside of that can kind of be cleaned up. And we can also use that or use the results to create a more consolidated list or concise list of everything that's active. I wouldn't say that we go through and scour your data and clean up all those things that might be messy nuances. So unfortunately, that still requires a bit of manual interaction.
One thing I'll add on to that, Greg, too, is like Greg said, we're not going to be able to do every single file, and it does depend on it. But we do have a data validation phase where we are going to kind of help get those files into the right format when starting out a project, because everybody's data does have a tendency to come in different formats and sometimes with pieces of information all over the place. So.
Got it. Now remember, you will be able to talk with Relax and Dr. Pepper at the conference coming up next week. So if you've got any more questions, please either email out or just go and meet them, introduce yourself. Team, is there from any one of you any final thoughts for today?
One thing that I'll just kind of tag on, and I really appreciate all the questions that have come in, and thank you, Greg and John, for giving such good answers for that. One of the things, or the themes that you've probably kind of heard in the answers to this that I think made this project so successful was the configurability and the flexibility that we had. And so we're able to change and have multiple rule sets to really handle those complex scenarios that the convenience channel does bring up. And in addition to that, this project was a really great example of collaboration between the retailer, between Dr. Pepper, and between Relax, and really goes to show that when you're creating a team with folks focusing on different areas, what a great output you can have from that. And like John said, we got a surprise announcement during this presentation today that really goes to show what we were able to accomplish, and it was really exciting.
That is. I congratulate you on that. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. Relax, Dr. Pepper, thank everybody for presenting. A lot of good nuggets there. Everybody, we'll see you next week in Nashville. Thanks again.